Remember the summer of 2018? It was a long time ago, and a lot has happened since then, so I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. But the Sacramento Kings and Zach LaVine in 2018 agreed to an offer sheet that the Chicago Bulls then matched, forcing Zach to go and play in Chicago. Well, Zach is a significantly a better player now than he was then, and the Kings could potentially be interested in acquiring him again. There have been rumors that Zach LaVine could be available in a sign and trade. It would be for a max contract. Would it make sense for the Sacramento Kings? And what would they have to give up in this sign and trade in order to land him? To answer some of those questions, I'm going to be joined by my man Haize, one of the hosts of the Locked On Bulls podcast, right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season and all off season. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a sports producer and reporter at ABC 10 News in Sacramento. And I remember the summer of 2018. I remember being very excited about the prospect of adding Zach LaVine to a De'Aaron Fox backcourt and what that team could be. Of course, like I said, the Chicago Bulls ended up matching that deal, and he went on to have a lot of success in Chicago. The Chicago Bulls have since changed their roster a lot, adding Nikola Vucevic last season around the trade deadline, a move that a lot of Kings fans compare their Domantas Sabonis trade to. And then this past offseason, adding DeMar DeRozan, who had an MVP caliber season for Chicago. All of that is accumulated, and suddenly the Bulls might be willing to move on from LaVine. But LaVine is also trying to get every single penny he can get, and rightfully so. So a max contract, sign and trade, sounds like it is potentially on the table. How many teams in the NBA would even be interested in trading away the assets that it would take to acquire LaVine in that sign and trade? Not only on top of that, you have to pay all that money to Zach LaVine. If the Kings pulled this move off while hanging on to De'Aaron Fox, you have two max contracts here in Sacramento to worry about. Does it make sense? And what would it take to get the deal done? My man Haize, one of the hosts of the Locked On Bulls podcast, joins me today on Locked On Kings to talk about this, plus give us an idea of if and why Zach LaVine is available, anything that's going on in Chicago. We also talk a little bit about Lonzo Ball at the end of this podcast. If you want to put together any of your trade scenarios for what you would give up in order to acquire Zach LaVine, or do you even want Zach LaVine? Would you say, no, avoid him, he's not worth it, or he's not the right guy for the Kings to go out and target? Let me know at Matt George Sack on Twitter. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. Leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. Think about that. Put your GM hats on and take a listen to my conversation with Haize. This season, I picked the Chicago Bulls as my Eastern Conference team. Every single year, I pick a team in the East to follow closely. The Chicago Bulls were that team. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that the offseason before, they had just acquired Vucevic. Zach LaVine, he had reached that star status that many believe that he could be for a long period of time. And then the Chicago Bulls bring in DeMar DeRozan, who suddenly this season has an MVP caliber season and single-handedly brings back the mid-range game. So all of a sudden, the Chicago Bulls team, who did unfortunately slide a little bit towards the end of the season, all of a sudden the Chicago Bulls team might not be sticking together as much as maybe I thought. Zach LaVine could potentially be available in sign and trade scenarios, but naturally when I hear stuff like this, I go, I'm skeptical. It's like, is this just off-season talk, or is there a legitimate possibility of Zach LaVine leaving the Chicago Bulls or his time as a Chicago Bull being over? I can't answer those questions, but I know a man who can. One of the hosts of the Locked On Bulls podcast, my man Haize here, joining me on Locked On Kings. Welcome in, my friend. It's a pleasure to have you on. Very excited to have this conversation. Zach LaVine is a player that I love to just follow and watch. So if there's any potential of him being available, you know I'm interested.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me, man. I appreciate this. And I've said that this is the summer of Zach LaVine trade rumors. Like, that's just what's going to happen this summer. I do think that for the most part, it has just been off-season noise. That's the way that I take it. I think that there may be maybe slight smoke to that fire, just in the case of, like, if the Bulls did try to undercut them or maybe include some provisions that they don't necessarily want, that they may look at a sign and trade, but I really do just think this is Clutch Sports doing what Clutch Sports does best, and that's getting their player the most money possible. So
Oh, so you think it has more to do with Clutch Sports and less to do with, let's say the Bulls didn't go on that slide towards the end of the season. Let's say they ended the season maybe on a strong note. Do you think
mhm.
that would have also diminished some of these rumors and conversations as well? Because everybody looks at a team that's struggling and tries to find the odd man out. And I think it's
Yeah.
easy to make Zach LaVine that guy.
Absolutely. I think if they didn't have the slide, if maybe they made it out the first round of the playoffs, and Zach was healthier towards the end of the season too. I think people forget just how good Zach was before the thumb and then the knee and then the back thing all kind of happened. Zach was close to the elite 50, 40, 90 stat line of that you want to see from elite offensive players. But yeah, I definitely think that it's to do with a lot of things of how the Bulls season ended. But for the most part, I've said this before too. It may come back to bite me, but I'm not worried about Zach LaVine leaving. I really do think that it's $55 million. Why it makes more sense for Zach LaVine to stay with the Bulls than any other team. So
People forget Zach LaVine's free agency passed when he was a restricted free agent. The Sacramento Kings, under
Haize.
former leadership here with different front office, Vlade Divac tried to offer LaVine a pretty healthy contract to come join De'Aaron Fox in
Mhm.
Sacramento. The Bulls matched that deal. And I remember I was working in sports talk radio here in Sacramento at the time, and I remember hearing people here in Sacramento say, "Boy, the Kings dodged a bullet there. Thank you, Bulls. The Kings are going to pay Zach LaVine way too much money. The Kings have Buddy Hield. They don't need Zach LaVine." I
Mhm.
remember saying, "Man, I would have loved to have Zach LaVine just for the backcourt highlights between him and Fox." Safe to say, though, Haize, that contract that wasn't much of a talking point in Chicago pretty quickly when he stayed healthy.
Oh yeah, for sure. The Zach LaVine proved that contract was going to be underpay very, very early on into that contract, and I think that plays into why he wants to make sure that he gets the max money now, because he did take a bit of he could have gotten more if he was healthy. You mind that season going into that, he played a partial season. That was his first season back from ACL surgery, so it makes sense. But I definitely think that plays into a part of why he wants to make sure he gets the most money this contract.
From afar, I remember reading or hearing rumors and conversation of the Chicago Bulls last season had to make some moves like this Nikola Vucevic move in order to show Zach that they're willing to win right now or try and build around him and take advantage of how well he was playing. And the
Mhm.
Sacramento Kings can relate to that in a small sense with making this Domantas Sabonis move last season in order to kind of appease De'Aaron Fox and show Fox, look, we still believe you're our guy. We want to build around you. Uh, why now? Is it simply because DeMar DeRozan had the season that he had that it's even a possibility that Zach LaVine's not the guy anymore, or is he still very much the guy there?
Zach LaVine is very much the guy. I think people play into that storyline, don't really pay attention to the analytics of basketball. Yes, DeMar got a lot of the fourth quarter highlights. He was the king of the fourth. But keep in mind, Zach, I don't think would shy away from appreciating that because of the teammates that he played with before. But when you look at the averages, DeMar DeRozan only got 1.5 shots more than Zach LaVine, and Zach LaVine actually got more shots than DeMar DeRozan in crunch time. Now we analyzed crunch time in the way that stat was broken down, and I think the game being tied or them being down with like less than 5 minutes to go, but the Bulls went to Zach LaVine more than they went to DeMar DeRozan in those times. It's just DeMar averaged more points per shot in the fourth quarter, but Zach got just as many shots pretty much as DeMar DeRozan over the course of the season. So I don't really believe, as much as people try to make that a storyline, that it's really one.
Well, that speaks volumes to me in this potential sign and trade conversation, because if the Bulls still view Zach LaVine as the guy, the only way you're trading the guy is if you get a guy in return, or if you get equal
Exactly.
value in return. I look at the Chicago Bulls situation; they're certainly not rebuilding; they're trying to win right now. So we'll dive into a little bit of what the Sacramento Kings could potentially offer, even though I have a feeling I know where this conversation's already going, Haize. But what would in your mind, what would you have to expect the Chicago Bulls to get to return, or in return for them to even consider signing and trading LaVine?
That number 4 pick has to be in there,
Yeah.
I think. And then of course, to make salaries work, you kind of look at the Sacramento Kings roster. It's either going to be just to make it work, either what, because Harrison Barnes is still in the contract another season, right?
He's got one more year, 18 million. Yeah.
So it may be Harrison Barnes, or at that point you're looking at, because I doubt they take Jeremy Lamb. You're looking at maybe Sabonis in that case. So like, and is that a deal breaker for Sacramento? Because Sabonis is a big part. And look, Sabonis looked great after getting with De'Aaron Fox. Looked great. I like that combination together.
So that's it's interesting here, is because you look at the Sacramento Kings offseason, you go, okay, the Kings are looking to add one more major piece to this Fox and Sabonis core. I would be on record as saying if the Kings added Zach LaVine, he becomes the piece. Like as much as I like Sabonis, as much as I like Fox, LaVine comes in here and probably takes the reins. There are going to be some people in Sacramento with this that disagree with me with that, but I'm looking at what he's been able to do in Chicago, and I think that speaks for itself. So I have a hard time believing the Kings in any of these trade scenarios would be willing to move on from Sabonis, which I agree with you would probably be where trade talks and deals break down. But I don't blame you for bringing up that name because you need to get that kind of return for LaVine. Before we continue on that further, let me just ask, LaVine is looking for that max contract, the 5 years, $200+ million. You think LaVine's worth that money? Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. 12th in the league in scoring this year with being injured half the season. For a top person who can easily be in the top 10 in scoring in the league, yes, he has his defensive inefficiencies, and that's part of the reason they brought in Lonzo Ball. But Zach LaVine is absolutely worth that max.
Does the you said him being injured half the season? I know injury history has been something that has plagued him a little bit, although it's been less of a narrative recently, which I think is important. But do you think that drives down his value at all, or is the injuries not significant enough to say he's not worth that max?
Yeah, I mean, considering what came out this summer, it was really he just needed a scoping and cleaning. That's no structural damage. They don't expect anything long term. I really wouldn't think that. You guys actually put injury provisions in the contract he's currently on, and we accepted that. And those injury provisions didn't even need to come in handy for the Bulls. So I don't really think that the injury thing is a big issue in my opinion.
Cool. So let's talk about a player that's just straight up really athletic, really prolific on the offensive end. There are questions about defense. The entire Kings roster, with the exception of like Davion Mitchell, is basically a question mark anyway. So that wouldn't be too much of an issue. But you said the 4 pick would have to be involved, and the way this trade would work is, since it would be a free agency sign and trade move, this is happening after the draft. So the Kings would have already selected a player at 4. Now that doesn't mean that the Kings and Bulls couldn't already be in conversation right now, and the Kings could say, hey, if we took this guy at 4, is this the guy that you would want? Or essentially making a long-term pick for the Chicago Bulls. If there is a guy that fell to 4 realistically, or a guy that you think would be like, if that guy was at 4, the Bulls would be way more willing to have this conversation in this draft, who is that guy?
I look at Shaedon Sharpe or Ochai Agbaji. I look at those two being high potential picks that can slide into replacing Zach LaVine long term at the shooting guard position. Shaedon Sharpe, to me, I look at him, and yeah, he's still a lot raw there. The scoring ability's there. The defense, again, that's a question, but it's a question with Zach LaVine as well. But I really, really like Shaedon Sharpe. Good size for a guard, 6'5", 200 pounds. And I think that would be a pick. Unless they want to go big at that point, then you're looking at maybe Jaren Duren or someone like that. But if they want to go shooting guard, and then if we keep our own pick and we're going big with that pick, I look at a Shaedon Sharpe probably being the pick that I would hope to be there.
Interesting. So I just had my last podcast talking about Shaedon Sharpe a little bit, and he's someone who I would avoid for the Sacramento Kings like the plague personally, just because I know the Kings past. I know what the Kings are trying to do right now, and Sharpe seems like more of a project, more of a risk that the Kings can't afford to take. But what I said in that last podcast is I think Shaedon Sharpe needs to go somewhere that it's an established program that he can just go into, and they can take their time with him a little bit. Let me ask you this. If let's say the scenario plays out and the Bulls move on from Zach LaVine, bring in this Shaedon Sharpe. Do you expect there to be any kind of slight drop off, or do you expect Chicago to kind of pick up where they left off in terms of success behind DeRozan?
There's going to be absolutely some drop off, but I think that the thing with the Bulls is that if Zach LaVine does leave, they're not going to be as far away as they were, for example, when they traded Jimmy Butler. They're closer to that. And even bringing in the Shaedon Sharpe at that point, you have 2 years of him being mentored by DeMar DeRozan to kind of jumpstart that development a little bit. So there's going to be a slight drop off. Maybe instead of being a playoff team, they're a play-in team, something like that. But I think that there's enough veterans still on this team. Maybe Patrick Williams takes a leap too, that it's not as big as some people may think.
And I don't necessarily have the cap situation in front of me, so I would have to do kind of a deeper dive here. We both would have to find out what kind of money would have to work out in order to make this deal happen. Kings would have to throw out a decent amount of outgoing money, and this is where the question of what is that money expiring contracts? Because the Kings have a boatload of expiring contracts. That does nothing for the Chicago Bulls in that situation. Most of the time, expiring contracts are for a team that is, like I said, rebuilding, that doesn't really care about next season. Kings could certainly offer draft picks on top of that, which I think they would. Again, how much value is that to the Chicago Bulls, even though a Kings draft pick is basically almost guaranteed to be lottery? If the Kings had Zach LaVine, more than likely they're not a lottery team anymore.
This is true.
So these are all things that would be taken into account. But I go back to you bringing up Domantas Sabonis' name, Fox's name. It feels like realistically, Haize, if if Zach LaVine is coming to Sacramento, one of those two is probably involved in this conversation. I don't see a way that those two stay here and Zach is added to them.
The only way that I can see that it may not be is that if they value that first round pick and who they get there enough as part of their future and maybe another future second or something, those expiring contracts, maybe AK does value a little bit more, considering that Vooch is also expiring contract next year. The Bulls at that point may be able to be big time free agent, because if Zach leaves and we don't resign him, we're $16 million under the cap. You throw in expiring contracts, Vooch is expiring next year too. Maybe the Bulls think, hey, we have enough here we can take a big swing at a free agent the following year, and maybe that cap space then is more valuable than maybe what we're thinking at that point.
Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by BetOnline, your number one source for all your betting stats and sports information. You can find all the latest sports developments, news, and odds, including this year's NBA Finals going on right now, the NHL Hockey Conference Finals, Major League Baseball, of course, fighting news from the MMA, UFC, and boxing. They have it all. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and more. Plus, they have a bunch of fun prop and futures bets, usually around landing destinations for players. I don't think there's one for Zach LaVine right now, but there is one for DeAndre Ayton. You can bet on where DeAndre Ayton will end up if he is not a Phoenix Sun next season. You can bet on like the futures for the NFL. Now that the NFL schedules are out, you can bet on over/under win totals for teams. There's so much fun to be had. Sports gambling and so much money to be made. You can use your sports knowledge to cash in, and when you do so, make sure you're doing it on BetOnline. Head to the website today. Use your mobile device. Learn more about the trends and the action at BetOnline, where the game starts. What would be your thought process? Let's start with the absolute ideal scenario for the Kings. Zach LaVine is added to De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis. How do you think that would work overall?
I think talent always figures it out. It may be rough there for a while, but I mean, Zach at this point now, I think this season may have done a lot of development for Zach, learning how to play without the ball and learning how to play next to a ball dominant player in DeMar DeRozan. So maybe it does help some. And like I said, I think the talent eventually works it out. And I'm very, very high on De'Aaron Fox. Like, I'm super high on Fox. So I think that a backcourt between him and Rose, while they may have their defense deficiencies, offensively, that's a team that you look at and say, yeah, they have some defensive woes, but can you really outscore them at that point?
So based off the answer to that question, I think I know the answer to this one. If you had to choose between pairing LaVine with one of those two, Fox or Sabonis, would it be Fox just because it's a guards league?
It would be Fox, absolutely.
Yeah. And specifically, is that just because of the athleticism, because of the offensive outpouring? Like, what do you think? Because Fox he struggled last year with playing with another guard who needed to be a little ball dominant in Tyrese Halliburton, although Halliburton more of a pass first guard, LaVine more of a natural two compared to 2 point guards, you would say, in that Halliburton Fox conversation. Why do you think Fox and LaVine could work as a dynamic backcourt?
Because I actually like both of them without the ball a little bit more. I've seen Zach, so I know Zach can play without the ball and be very well, especially if he can come off screens and things like that. And I think that, like I said, it'll take some time. It may take the full season, it may take half the season, but there's so much talent in that guard lineup that I think that they'll find a way to work it out.
Then let me ask you this about this Chicago Bulls offseason. Of course, Zach LaVine is going to pretty much be at the center of it, what they decide to do with him, how that'll affect your future. You just talked about what they could do next season of free agency. But in your mind, just so Sacramento is aware, like what is the expectation of Chicago Bulls fans, the expectations of the organization for what Chicago accomplishes this offseason? Because I have to imagine they're looking at amongst the top of the Eastern Conference next year. Their window seems like right now.
Yeah, I mean, the windows is right now, but it can be extended with the development of Io, with the development of P. Will, things like that. But I expect this front office to really go and improve that bench, because we were almost dead last in bench scoring, bench production last season. So I think they're going to really look to improve that bench so that we can keep up the pressure. Because when our starters came off, they had to do a lot of work coming back in after that. So I think they're going to focus on improving the bench with veterans, with depth pieces, and just players that they can depend on. And then at that point, is that enough to go further? And I do think that Chicago Bulls fans, it can't be a first round exit next year. And if it is, it has to be a heck of a competitive series. I think that they have to get out that first round next season.
Lonzo Ball is another interesting character. He's someone that we've paid very close attention to here in Sacramento because of the history between himself and De'Aaron Fox, them being in the same draft class. Lonzo is going into year 2 of his contract, I believe, like around $19-20 million. What does his future look like in Chicago?
Well, the thing is, when Lonzo was on the court, he was everything that he was advertised to be. He pushed the pace. Defensively, he changed the outlook of the Chicago Bulls. He was their second leading rebounder overall in his time there. It's just him staying on the court. 35 games is not going to cut it. No matter how good you look in those 35 games, we need you to stay healthy. And even hearing some of the things still with his knee this offseason and the uncertainty there, it is concerning. But I think long term that as long as Lonzo can be on the court, I don't have any issues because I don't have any concerns because he was everything that we thought and needed him to be when he was on the court last year.
Completely separate from the Zach LaVine conversation. I don't necessarily see this making sense with their backcourt situation right now, Fox and Davion Mitchell, et cetera.
Yeah.
If the Sacramento Kings came calling about Lonzo Ball, what does it take to get that conversation started in your mind? Like, what is Lonzo Ball you think worth in the market? Because I think he's got a lot to offer if he stays healthy. A lot to offer.
If he stays healthy, I think, Lonzo Ball has a lot to offer and he has a lot of value. I think at that point you're looking at if the Sacramento Kings came calling, Fox has to be the centerpiece of that deal.
Wow.
I would think.
Wow.
And that may not get the job done, or maybe at that point it is Sabonis. But I guess in my mind I'm trying to get over the fact of a De'Aaron Fox, Lonzo Ball backcourt and how would that work?
I have no idea. But it would be fun. It would be fun to figure out.
Yeah, it would be fun to watch it, but yeah.
Well, Haize, I'm very anxious to see what happens with Chicago this offseason. My gut feeling, as much as I would like the idea of Zach LaVine, I do have questions about how Zach would work in Sacramento as well, certainly on the defensive end, but that's not specific to Zach. It doesn't seem like it's all that possible, but it's fun to pay attention to. Regardless, I'm very interested to see what Chicago does this offseason. Of course, you and your partner over there at Locked On Bulls will have everything covered. Should be fun. And then, I don't know, I might pick the Bulls as my Eastern Conference team again next season because they were a lot of fun. My favorite basketball games that I watched this year were Chicago Bulls basketball.
And it's funny that you asked me to be on this because I grew up a Chicago Bulls fan. My dad's from the South Side of Chicago, so it was bred in me. But the Sacramento Kings were my second favorite team for a long time, if for nothing else than the Chris Webber era. And I loved watching them play for a long, long time. So
well, we're desperate to get back to that, my guy. But it makes me happy to see Chicago, the Bulls fans enjoying some. I mean, it's just the NBA is better when the Chicago Bulls are better. It's just the reality of the situation. That's all thanks to Jordan, what he was able to do when the Bulls are center stage. It just feels like it's natural. But Haize, you're the man. Appreciate you taking the time to do this, and I hope we'll be able to do it again soon for some other reason.
Absolutely, anytime.
Boy, Haize said some things there that I know are going to get you responding and thinking. Number one, and it doesn't surprise me, he brought up Domantas Sabonis being involved in this Zach LaVine sign and trade. I had a feeling going into this conversation, I didn't think there was going to be much way for the Kings to pull this deal off without moving on from De'Aaron Fox or Domantas Sabonis. However, Haize did mention there's a possibility of the Kings trading expiring contracts plus like a Harrison Barnes and some future first rounders that might draw the Bulls' attention. Maybe that interests you. And then we talked about Lonzo Ball at the end. He thinks De'Aaron Fox or Sabonis would have to be involved in any kind of Lonzo Ball trade. First off, it doesn't make sense for the Kings to pursue Lonzo Ball, period. Second off, I'm not giving up either of those guys for Lonzo Ball at this point in time. That's just me. Maybe I'm overvaluing them. I don't think that's going to be that popular of an opinion by Haize here on Locked On Kings. I don't see any scenario where Lonzo Ball is worth that. But maybe you feel differently. Whatever you want to respond to from that conversation, please do so at Matt George Sack on Twitter. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. Leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. If I had to bet, I would bet Zach LaVine will not be a Sacramento King next season. And you know what? That's okay. There's still exciting things that the Kings could do with this draft pick, with this 4th overall pick. And we're not done talking about what they could do with it. We're less than 2 weeks away now from the NBA draft. And next week on Locked On Kings, got plenty more content for you surrounding the draft, surrounding the Kings in general. Have another couple of great guests lined up as of right now. More on the way. One of those guests, the legendary Jerry Reynolds, that you can hear a lot on the Kings Herald podcast. He's taking a break from them to join me for an episode. Very excited to have Jerry on. We're going to talk about not just who he prefers in this draft class, but we're also going to talk about how he would approach this draft. Jerry Reynolds, a former NBA head coach. What is the coach's perspective on a draft? What is a coach's perspective on the fit versus best player available conversation? If you have a system that you want to run and think there's a player out there that perfectly fits that system, is that more enticing to you? Or would you rather get your hands on the best player and change your system to match them, believing that they could carry you to the finish line? Jerry Reynolds will discuss that and more with me next week on Locked On Kings. I hope you will join me for that. And we are like 3 reviews away from reaching our goal of 350 reviews on Apple Podcasts. I should have made the goal higher, but regardless, I'm sticking to my word. If we get over 350, I will be buying a pair of opening night lower bowl Kings tickets inside the Golden One Center, and I will be giving them away to Locked On Kings listeners here for helping me reach that goal. Thank you to everyone who's left a review. If you could leave a review to get us over that mark, if you haven't already, please do that. Also, thank you for all the great reviews on Spotify. I see you there as well. The support has been incredible, and I look forward to continuing that as the offseason rolls on. Have yourself a great day. Can't wait to join you or have you with me next week on Locked On Kings. Until then, my name is Matt George. You have been listening to the Locked On Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.